just to revisit, we did this use case last month, but from the operator's perspective. So Tony Chalfie and Nelson Rupi from Adams Outdoor Eastern PA were on the session with us. And we looked at this group of tri-state, a select group of the tri-state Toyota group, and really started to look at, again, from the operator's perspective, how would you meet their needs? How would you handle their requests and really help them kind of strategically move from the strategy that they're using now to a more audience-based strategy. And there's the link there if you want to check it out. It's they're all available on our YouTube channel and also on in our Geek Out library, as well as on just the Geek Out tab of our homepage. So over the course of the month, I was talking with Matt, and we were deciding, like, let's look at this from an agency perspective. Let's take the mirror image of this same use case, and how would that be different for somebody who is planning it from the agency side. So just to review the use case. So again, as I said, it's a Tri-State Toyota group. There's a group of 3 local dealerships that we're working with in this use case, and that's what we focused on last month. So they like out of home, they use it, they tend to use it very directionally, and they really focus a lot on, hey, I want these units to be by my dealership, right? So with the goal with this scenario is we want to understand and illustrate, how do we move them from this traditional view of maybe out of home to more of a strategic view that is more audience-based in how we reach audience and how we think about audience. And so there's 2 strategies here. So first strategy being kind of reaching those Toyota auto intenders, and then maybe thinking about conquesting Honda prospects. So kind of a close-in competitor. How do we start to conquest that group or that audience? And so here's some of the specifics of the use case. So similar to last time, the DMA is the Philadelphia DMA, and counties are Northampton and Lehigh. And then we have a budget that we came up with for this is about $18,000, and non-digital bulletins. Current target audience of what they currently do, it's really about that reaching adults 18 plus. And then we have our 2 strategies about reaching those in the market for Toyota and those in the market for Honda. But the ultimate goal for the dealers is to increase the number of test drives at these dealerships. So that's the ultimate metric that we want to be measured by for this project. Before we jump into it, I do want to ask Matt, just a few questions, and some interesting things came up as we were starting to brainstorm and talk about this use case. So Matt, when a client like this, so kind of a local client, but 3 of them coming together as a group, what are they typically coming to you with in terms of goals? Is it a budget goal? Is it an impression goal? Like, what's going on there when they're reaching out to you typically?
Yeah, typically when a client like this comes to us, they'll come with their budget, sort of who they're looking to target, as well as typically just 1 or 2 goals. So this is very much in line with something we would get week in, week out from any of our more local clients. Okay.
And in terms of like strategy, thinking about how you start to kind of form this strategy, like, how does that happen? What drives that from your perspective? Is it so tied to the budget, or is it just more about have their ultimate goal? Like, how do they tend to talk about their ultimate goals to you?
Well, when they present us with whatever their success metric or sort of driving goal is for the campaign, we then take a step back and see, okay, what are the steps we can take to get either to reach their target audience or get their target audience to sort of complete what their overall goal is. For this instance, increasing the number of people coming into the dealerships to do the test drives.
Okay. All right, cool. Awesome. And so just to reiterate, just going back to their current strategy, and this next slide may look familiar, but just again, this was an example of a potential current buy for them, right? The 3 dealerships that mapped out, those are the 2 counties that we talked about, and the 3 dealers mapped out. And again, you can see that this current strategy is really clustered around their dealership. So heavily based right where the dealerships are, and pretty evenly split, if you will, as well. So as we look at that, as we look at their current strategy and trying to move them to a different kind of focus in how they think about audience and how they reach audience, I'm going to hand it off to Matt to kind of talk through the process he went through and how he would use this data to really start to move the client into this direction.
Sure thing. Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
So when we are taking this approach from more of an agency perspective, we're looking at things across all operators, not so much 1 or 2 operators within any given region. So it's kind of taking what the previous example was and sort of multiplying it out 2 or 3 times in order for us to get a full sense of the entire inventory throughout any given market, in this case, the 2 counties in the Philadelphia DMA.
Cool.
So to match up with this strategy, I started diving into the different consumer profile audiences within Geopath, just to get a good idea of what kind of Toyota-centric or Toyota-related audiences were in there, if any. And we came across a handful of 4 or 5 different options, and in sort of reading through each one, the first example seemed like it was the best one to reach people who are not only fans of Toyota or like Toyota, but they're also in the market potentially for to purchase a new Toyota car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thing, and not to put you on the spot here, one thing with the, I know we talk a lot about the audiences available in the tool, right? There's 8,000 different audiences available through Geopath's, insights data. Just any thoughts for you on that, and some of the benefits of that, but maybe some of the things we need to think about or challenges you might see with that, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the main benefit that comes to mind is just the fact that we can measure impressions across hundreds upon hundreds of new audiences that not only sort of open the door to a number of different possibilities for us, but also further in line an out-of-home impression with, say, a display ad impression or a digital video impression. But on the counter to that, as more of a negative thing, that also opens it up to hundreds upon hundreds of audiences. So until you get familiar with sort of the types of different groups of audiences that are in there, it can take some time to sort of weed through all the different ones in there to find that exact one or that exact handful of audiences that really is going to match well with what your strategy is.
Right. No, that makes sense. I would also too imagine, I wonder, because there are so many different variations on audience, just making sure we as an industry are specific when we talk to each other, right? About when you may reach out to an operator, I'm looking for this specific audience, not the one below it, I wonder if that is to make sure as we think about
communication will be key.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So got our audience, you figured out the audience, and then the next is, it says you're narrowing down.
Yeah, so afterwards we sort of narrowed down the inventory throughout the 2 counties into the top 25 static bulletins that index the best for our target audience. So a lot of things sort of jump out at me once I get to this point and sort of are visualizing how the inventory lays out on the map. For starters, there's only sort of 2 of the dealerships have units within close proximity, so I'm already starting to think of ways to address this issue that is more than likely going to come up with the client. The second thing on more of a planning side is that I'm noticing a pattern of different clusters of these bulletins throughout the market. So I'm going to start looking at, okay, how do I pick not only the best inventory, but also make sure it's spread out amongst all of the units and not having, say, 3 units back to back to back on a highway just because they're indexing the highest.
Cool. And then
yeah, so from this, then we have to get further down into our package of 6 to 8 units that we're going to be recommending to the client. And you're probably wondering, how do we get down from 25 units that all kind of look like they're around the same area down further into just those 6? And that's where we take a deeper dive into a lot of the measurements behind each unit. So I look at the information that we can pull from Geopath into more specifics like target impressions, target TRP, reach frequency, and indexing of each unit. And then I look back at the map. I take the different clusters and sort of go through them cluster by cluster, pulling out the top unit or the top 1 or 2 units from each cluster to build a plan that gives more coverage on top of also having units that are performing really well against our target audience.
And when like the client, I feel like sometimes with the clients, it's like, hey, potentially like, I just want to reach my audience. Like when you're having maybe a general goal or a general kind of metric goal, like it's not like, hey, I want 50 TRPs. What are you using to make that decision, based on this 25? Was it a combination of different things and, or is it one specific thing that for you you find more important than another?
I usually look across a number of the different sort of segments that we can pull. For an instance where we have a very targeted audience that we're going off of, I'm going to look a little more towards target impressions, target TRPs versus the full market-wide impressions. But once we get down into those specific sort of silos of different information, I'm sort of looking at all of them as a whole. Some units might have a very high target impression count, but their indexing might not be as high or their reach might not be as high. So I'm factoring in all of the different categories and seeing which ones have a good baseline read, or if I want to mix some that have higher target impressions and mix others that have, say, a higher reach or a higher frequency to get a more well-balanced plan, given the fact that we can have multiple units in this package and it's not just a request for a single unit.
All right, cool. So you have our 25, you're using all those kind of filters that you just spoke about. And so then what happens next?
Yeah, so then I select my 6 or so units that I'm looking to make as a recommendation. And then I want to go back to the map to see how they spread out across the market, again, to make sure that I'm not sort of putting all my eggs in one basket or one highway, say, along the market. I want a good overall coverage that's also reaching the target audience. So this is what we came up for this example. And so you can see that's, sorry.
All I was going to say is like, and this, like, to me, it looks very different, right, than what they're probably used to in terms of their current strategy.
Yeah. From a location-based perspective, the one dealership sort of right in the middle of the map's got something that the client would probably typically be interested in. It looks like it's right outside the dealership, but then the dealership to the left, while they have some highway coverage, it's not something that's going to be very directional or right on top of the dealership. And then the third one off to the right is something where there's no coverage. So that's going to be something that really jumps out at them, being that they're used to buying inventory that's within a specific radius throughout the boards. But as we start to dig into things and we look at on a board by board case and see sort of how different zip codes are indexing against the board locations, that really opens things up and shows that it's not really about exactly how the inventory is laying out across the market, but who's driving past those boards, what audiences they're reaching. That leads us into this map that shows for one of the boards, they're not quite indexing as high in the zip code that the board's directly located in, but it's reaching the zip codes that are in and around that last dealership that had no coverage in it. So while we're not having something that's right down the street from the dealership, we're still reaching target audiences from those zip codes and providing really good coverage of that area.
Right, right. Yeah, I always find these maps, personally, I find them interesting, right? Because it really helps to me, I think, tell that movement story that out of home has, that's inherent in out of home. It's not just where it's located, it's where the audience is coming from and to.
Yeah, these types of maps always pull out different surprises whenever I look at them, and this is a perfect example of it, where it's sort of solving a problem as well as just being a genuinely interesting thing to look at, and sort of seeing how the traffic and the population moves in and out of the different zip codes throughout the market.
Right. And then I think there's another example coming up here too.
Yeah, and this one is even more surprising, where it's still within the general greater Allentown area that we were looking at with the two counties. But when we look at it down at a zip code level, it's indexing really high in zip codes that are around the King of Prussia area, which is more of a suburb of Philadelphia, not so much Allentown. So it just further proves the point of it's not exactly about the location, but it's, like you said, more about how people move throughout the different areas within the region.
Okay, cool. So started with our inventory, we narrowed it down, we got our plan, kind of talking about showing about the audience, the movement, and then kind of have our metrics to it. So what would you focus on for something like this with this client?
Yeah, I think typically we would start off with the two at the top, the total impressions of the package and the total target impressions. Those are really the two stats that a lot of clients, big or small, really like to gravitate towards. But we always are quick to point out that additional metrics that we can measure the plan by as well, and that comes with the different percent comps, comp indexes, TRPs, so on and so forth. So we like to inform the clients that it's not just about the impressions, or it's not the only thing we can measure, given that's the important thing, but we also have these additional ones that we can reach out to as well.
Cool. All right, cool. Do you find that sometimes is that more of an education process, or do they track with you pretty well on that kind of stuff, on the additional, beyond just impressions discussion?
It really depends on the client. A lot of the ones that are more coming from agencies are more attuned to like reaches and frequencies, just because there's that familiarity with the crossover and the same terminology with digital plans. So it's about a 50-50 mix of educating and then sort of just being up to speed with everyone else.
Okay, cool. All right, so then the second strategy, that's conquesting Honda prospects. So I guess in your mind, how would you start to, how does this become a strategy for you? How does it, you think about, oh, well, what about this opportunity here?
Yeah, so the previous strategy is a very direct one. It's the first one that comes to mind. They're Toyota dealerships. They want to bring people in. Let's reach out to people who are interested in Toyota cars. This one is one that's becoming a little more indirect. It's not just looking at the people interested in the brand, but also it's more looking at people who maybe aren't interested in Toyotas, or they're fans of Hondas, but at the same time, they're still interested in potentially buying or renting a new car. So it's still a like-minded audience, even though it's not one that is directly related to our brand.
Gotcha. All right, well, cool. And so so here's the process you walk through.
Yeah, and this one really mirrors what we did before with the first strategy. We're looking in the consumer sort of behavioral target audiences within GeoPath, within the Insight Suite. For this time, anything related to Honda or fans of Honda cars, and we're seeing a similar handful of 4 or 5. We're picking a similar target audience that sort of just switches out the Toyota brand with the Honda brand.
Mm-hmm.
but it's really mirroring the same process that we did for the first strategy.
Okay.
And when we filter this down into the top 25 units, a couple things that really jump out to me with this is that it's not an exact mirror image of what our last what our last sort of layout of the inventory looked like. This has a little more inventory that's central. It's more along the highways that are going north and south versus the ones that are going east-west. It's a little more compact coverage as well, not as widespread as the top 25 for the Toyota units.
Okay.
And then again, just as we did with the previous strategy, we're looking and taking that deeper dive into the metrics within each individual unit. Again, I'm looking at different clusters of units and really picking out the best one or two units from those clusters, looking at the same types of information, the target impressions, target TRP, region frequency, and sort of getting a good inventory that's balanced well across all of those, and it's not sort of leaning in any one direction with any of those.
Right, gotcha. And then your final plan.
Yeah, so when I picked the top 6 units that I would recommend for this package, it kind of mirrors the compactness of how the top 25 laid out. Again, there's not as much coverage for the western or the northern side of the map, and there's a little more coverage as you go east and south towards the map. It's really interesting how they're 2 car companies and 2 things that are, when you think about them, very, very similar, but the way the inventory lays out, it's very, very different.
And we'll show that in a little bit for everyone on the call. And then similar kind of, I would expect too, the similar need to kind of refocus that conversation around any concerns they might have about the audience they're reaching. Right?
Yeah, and one thing that I forgot to mention before is, while these maps are very useful and very helpful in our planning phase of picking this bulletin recommendation, that isn't to say that this information shouldn't just stop here. We can utilize this for if we want to layer place-based ads or poster inventory on top of the bulletin package. We know which zip codes are going to be indexing highest and look for the smaller media types, whether they're posters or gym signs or gas station ads in these high indexing zip codes, to just further amplify that region frequency. And in an even bigger picture, we could share this with the client, whether they're the advertiser or an agency, to help influence other marketing channels as well, which I think could be very, very beneficial if they don't already have this information.
Right. Cool. And, to your point about like other types of units or layering those in, is that something that would be like, hey, here's kind of an additional thing to like an upsell, or is that within, let me reconfigure this 15,000 differently? Or how would that work for you typically?
Yeah, we would typically show it as an upsell or as an add-on. We would show them exactly what they're looking for. Here's your package of your bulletins, but we recommend sort of peppering in these different additional media types for an added budget throughout the market as well. And here's the data that backs up why it makes sense to do that. And that's what we're able to do with this kind of granular analyzation of billboard by billboard on a zip code level.
Gotcha. Cool. All right, and so we mapped out this one unit, and then here's a second unit similarly that we mapped out. Any thoughts or perspective on either of these 2 slides that is any different than some of the other points we've made already?
I just think this one is really, really interesting, whereas it's indexing on zip codes higher directly north and south of Quakertown, but in the zip code that Quakertown is in, that's actually the lowest indexing zip code, it seems, throughout the entire market, which is just really, really interesting that it's sort of sandwiched in between these very high profile areas, but in that exact zip code itself, it's the exact opposite.
Right. Yeah, that is pretty interesting as well. Yeah. Cool. And then this plan metrics as well.
Yep. Yeah. And really same thing as with the first strategy. Right off the bat, we would call out the total impressions and total target impressions, but also inform the client that we've got these different metrics that we can look at as well. And it's not just about the total number of impressions that you're getting for this package.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. And so the next thing we wanted to do is just kind of compare the strategies and look at them side by side for everyone. And so this is a map of the two different plans in terms of the units that were selected. Any thoughts on this, or points that you want everybody to be aware of, or things that you might, point out to the client as you're talking through this with them?
Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me the most is the fact that there's an even split of units that are shared between both strategies. Those are both the red and blue dots that are side by side on the map. And then there's an even split of units that are sort of unique to each of the strategies. And it really mirrors how the whole, the top 25 layout of the units was with each strategy, where with the one, there's the more coverage in the north and the west. It's a little more, in general, spread out, versus the second strategy where it's more compact, but also providing more coverage to the east, towards the south as well.
Right, right. Does that, just one thought as you were saying that, does that provide so those ones that fit into both plans really well, even if you pick one strategy, does that provide different messaging opportunities, right? So I know this one works for if I'm trying to message, Honda potential, Honda conquest potential Honda prospects versus just reaching people in the market for Toyota. Are you able to use these kinds of maps or the data to guide that kind of thing, that level, the level of messaging, even within a broader campaign?
Yeah, and this actually works out really well with the fact that 3 units are shared between 2 strategies. So if the client did come to us and say, hey, I think I really like both of these strategies, can we get a mix of it? There's already a mix of it, just given the similarities between the two. So we could take, like you were saying, with one of these 3 units that are shared, we can have sort of different messaging, whether it's something more direct about conquesting Hondas or Honda fans, versus using the ones that are more unique to each strategy and have their own messaging as well. It gives a good blend of both strategies. If the client would like to go that way, if not, we would certainly recommend at least pointing out the fact that we could switch up the messaging so it's not the same thing throughout the entire market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. And then just for the metrics, we put those side by side for each other, for everyone as well, too.
Yeah, these ended up coming out almost exactly even. Granted, the first strategy's a little bit lower in your total impressions, but it's indexing higher. The TRPs are lower, but the percent bump is higher. And the exact opposite could be said for strategy 2, whereas, yeah, the total impressions, there's a bump there, but it's not indexing as high. It's got a higher total TRP and a higher reach, but the percent comp is a little bit lower. And I think what's really interesting is when it boils down to the total target impressions, they're only 1,000 off of one another, so they're almost exactly even.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what happens next with this? So you present this, and does the client, is there any kind of next steps that are typical? I would guess, maybe it's unique to each client, but, do you often find that it's strategy 1 or 2, or that they do want to mix? Is there anything that's common, or is it so specific to just the client and the situation?
Most times they do end up going with the strategy that's the most direct in reaching what their KPI or their success metric or their ultimate goal is.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also seeing a lot when we're presenting these additional strategies that are more of an indirect way of reaching what they're going after, that they might not go for the full strategy, but they'll at least want to cherry pick or select different options within it. In this instance, it could be, hey, we like strategy 2, but let's just devote 1 or 2 billboards to it. Let's not do the entire package focused on strategy 2. So there's definite benefits of using the data and presenting these additional strategies and showing the strength and the reasoning behind why we're pitching these additional packages on top of just the one that is the most direct for them.
Gotcha. Yeah. So like, sounds like I kind of like the idea. Let me test into it a little bit. Like, just kind of pick a few and use those as a test case almost.
Yeah, exactly.